Hello, everybody, and happy Thursday. This week has gone by so quickly. I don't know about you, but I feel like I blinked. It's almost Friday. But I am so excited about tonight's guest. Dr. Crystal or Dr. Taylor-Dietz is my sorority sister. So you guys know that makes me even more happy. And I've watched her blossom into this amazing psychologist. Amazing. And you guys
Oh,
know,
thank you.
can toot some horns, but I never tell lies. And I've seen what she's been doing. I've been stalking her on Instagram. I love the things that she's putting out. I love reading about all the advances and just everything that she's doing. I'll introduce her to you in a second. For those of you who don't know, my name is Tamika. I'm the mouth here at IG at Tamika Talks, and I'm the thought leader at Life and Pumps. Tea Talk Thursday is literally that, an opportunity for you guys to engage with people that maybe you wouldn't have necessarily thought it was important to engage with. So tonight, my guest is not only a psychologist and my sorority sister, but she's an amazing mom. So you might hear her son in the background, and that's okay because as moms, we're always doing double, triple duty. He might even show up on the live and say hi. I'm good with that, and hopefully you are too. But tonight, what we're going to talk about is mindfulness. You guys know I am all about self care, self love, and I feel like with 2023, it is the time for us to really do what we need to do, right? Everyone keeps saying we're going to walk in our purpose. And I think mindfulness is about walking in your purpose. So let me read you her amazing bio here, guys. So get ready, get ready, get ready. Dr. Crystal or Dr. TD. I like that. That's what I'm calling you from now on. Dr. TD is the National Director of Behavioral Health Services for one of the nation's largest behavioral health providers and is a licensed psychologist in Maryland and the District of Columbia. Dr. TD has over 13 years of behavioral health, mental health experience working in community based residential and outpatient services, including holding a number of leadership, management, and supervisory roles. She also maintains a small private practice in Bethesda, Maryland, conducting individual and family therapy with adults and adolescents, and providing consultations and professional talks, webinars for a variety of organizations, both nationally and abroad. Dr. TD is a member of the supervising faculty at the George Washington University. Of course, someone's trying to call me, professional psychology program, and is a teaching faculty member in the Child and Adolescence Training Program at the Washington School of Psychiatry. Her research, teaching, and clinical interests have included several issues. Sorry, guys. Hopefully, I didn't lose you guys. Okay, perfect. Have included, where was I? Several and included issues related to race, ethnicity, interculturality, mindfulness, and the intersection of psychology and spirituality. Guys, I want to introduce you to Dr. TD. Run
Hello.
with the crystal.
Hello.
So,
Hello.
and so wait, and before we actually went live, you were telling me about your telehealth. So I want to make sure that you include that in there because I think that's very important for people to know. Because as I was stating, I am always on the road. I travel a lot. And
Yeah.
I love that now telehealth means I don't have to miss important appointments. And I think
Yes.
meeting with a therapist is like up there for me with buying shoes. You guys know how I feel about my shoes. Meeting with the therapist is like buying shoes. It is a necessity. It is a must. It's like brushing your teeth every day. So
Mm-hmm.
take it away, Crystal. Talk to us about mindfulness and what you do in the state of mindfulness.
Yes. So, first of all, when it comes to the access to mental health services, we are in a whole new realm, thank you to COVID, where teletherapy has become much more a part of the norm. So, as a psychologist, our professional organizations have allowed us to do interjurisdictional certifications for providing teletherapy. So, I'm able to provide teletherapy in many states who have signed on to this legislation. So I say that to say that I'm not the only psychologist that has those credentials, right? So if you all are looking for a therapist and really can only do teletherapy and you're like, oh, maybe you want to see someone that you've seen that's in a different state, hit them up and see if they have that certification because they might be able to see you even though they don't live in your state. So back to mindfulness. You all have probably heard about mindfulness. It is such a pop culture phenomenon that we are in right now, and one that I love because I adore mindfulness. And mindfulness can really be thought of as moment to moment awareness. That is the simplest definition of mindfulness, moment to moment awareness. And mindfulness in itself is a quality. You can think of it as a skill that you can develop. It is separate from meditation, although mindfulness is used in meditation, and through meditation, you can develop increased mindfulness, but it's not the same as meditation. I think that's something that can get misconstrued when you kind of hear it used in pop culture terms.
Absolutely, because it has become very
Yeah.
trendy, and oftentimes people are interchanging the words. And I'm glad you said that they are different, but you can use it. So walk me through the steps. So why does it matter? Why should I be practicing mindfulness?
Yeah. Great question. So you can do mindfulness meditation. So that's one way to kind of engage in mindfulness, but there are other kinds of meditations that are not mindfulness based. And when we think of moment to moment awareness, there's a lot of reasons why it's helpful. I'll give you some of kind of the ones that are off the top of my head and the ones that you probably hear about the most. The first is that we live in a day and age where multitasking is part of our norm, right? And while people often give a lot of accolades for people who can multitask, the reality is that oftentimes in this day and age, when we're multitasking, we're not actually fully attending to things, right? When we don't fully attend to them, we can't be fully present to them, which means we also can't fully engage in them and get to as much of a comprehensive understanding or engagement for whatever is in front of you, right? Give, for example, you have a spouse or a partner and you're talking, but you're also in your phone. You're not really
Mm.
fully attending to that conversation, right? Which also means there's going to be things that you're going to miss in your emotions and your thoughts and your perceptions. So, mindfulness is really just about learning how to be as aware and present as you can in your moment so that you are fully engaged in that experience. I think for professionals, entrepreneurs, influencers like yourself, one of the reasons this is really important is because you have to figure out your path, right? You have to know where you want to get to and what you need to do to get there. And if you're distracted by so much input and so much information, and not really attending to what really is in your intuitive spirit, what your thoughts and feelings are separate from the noise, then it's hard to really know if you're going in the right direction, right?
Wow, that is amazing. Let me have you pause there because you just gave a whole like mouthful, right?
Yeah.
First, the communication piece, right? And I know that just the norm is to say, oh, put your phone down and pay attention and really be one kind of with your kids, right? But you hit it on a different head. You talked about your spouse. And I think that that is so important. And I'm guilty, and I'm sure my husband is probably watching this, probably like, yes, you are. That I don't often know how to turn it off because I always feel like I have to be on. And so in
Mhm.
2023, I am being extremely mindful of moments where I can turn it off and kind
Yeah.
of be in the moment. And I
Yeah.
think that COVID, if nothing else, should have taught us the importance of creating memories and really just being there and being in the know. And
Yeah.
then as an influencer, you're right. We are constantly like, okay, what's can I do this? Can I do that? And so for me, that's kind of why I started journaling and doing a brain dump before I go to bed at night
Yeah. Yeah.
because my sleep is usually horrible. Because even while I'm
So
sleeping, I'm
much.
like, well, did I do this? Did I do
Right.
that? Oh, I could do this one. Oh, I need to make sure I reply to that. And then
Mhm.
as an entrepreneur, we wear lots of hats. And
Lots.
so we kind of just feel like we can't turn it off. So that was, oh, girl, you hit the nail on the head with that one. But go
And
ahead.
let me touch the next one, which you kind
Uh
of
oh.
touched on, which is stress, right? And oftentimes our stress and our difficulties managing things or emotions manifest in difficulty sleeping, right? But mindfulness is one of the techniques that has been shown and practices that have been shown to really impact stress. So let me give you a couple ways that impact stress. One is this tendency for us to live in the past and always be thinking in the future, right? And the reality is that we can only control the right now. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't plan because we do need to plan, right? But there's times for planning and there's times to be present. And if you're never fully present, then you're constantly in a place that you actually can't control. We can't control what happened yesterday. We can't control what's going to happen tomorrow. we can control the here and the now, right? So part of stress management is learning how to be as present as you can to move away from stressful thoughts about past or future that you actually can't do anything about in the moment, right?
Mm.
You can find your joy in the present. It's really hard to find your joy in things that you're regretting, or hard to find your joy in things that haven't happened yet, right? So you can find your joy in the present.
Yes,
So, stress.
absolutely. Wow.
The
Yes, that's
other thing is that there was a major study that came out recently about mindfulness based stress reduction, which is a particular kind of mindfulness based practice that actually showed the benefits were commensurate, the same, equal to using an anti anxiety medication for individuals who were diagnosed with anxiety.
mm,
So we think about the fact that many people are skeptical about psychotropic medication and taking something for anxiety. Anxiety is a very common experience. Even for people that don't reach a point of having anxiety disorder, 70% of people will at some point experience anxiety, right?
mm.
And so the fact that you can have something that's holistic, that you can learn, do yourself to control that anxiety is a huge thing to consider. That's not to say that we should be against psychotropic medication. There's a place for them, but just to say
Absolutely.
that there's another way, right? And for people who
Right.
don't want to go that way, to try something that's behavioral based like mindfulness could be really helpful.
That is amazing because you're right. Anxiety, stress, I feel like it's all tied in, right? And there's
Mhm.
so many things that we can do to kind of like, put it at ease. But oftentimes, one, we don't recognize that it's not the norm. And I think for
Right,
too long, so many of us have been living in this realm where we felt like stress and anxiety, oh, it's just the norm, it's what happens.
right.
And we have to recognize that it's not the norm and it shouldn't be what's constantly happening because we also know that that also leads to health issues, right?
And we
When your
know,
body can't,
right.
yes,
And we know that
exactly.
stress leads to all of these health
Yes.
issues. We know that marginalized people, Black people, tend to have higher rates of those health issues, right? High blood pressure, difficulties with digestion, headaches, all of those things can be linked back to stress and other kinds of mental health symptoms. So I can't stress enough the ways that mindfulness can be helpful. Mindful breathing, especially breath. If you've ever done a talk on breath work, breath is so important to our health in so many ways, but it really starts with getting that oxygen flowing and helping the chemicals flow in our body and getting those toxins out. And so mindful breathing is a great step towards better breath work for you.
Okay, so for the person that's watching this, right, and they're like, yeah, yeah, whatever, mindfulness, it's a buzzword. It's what
Right.
people say. I recognize that I need to talk to someone, but I'm not really sure what I need to say or how I need to start the process. So,
Mhm.
so what's your recommendation?
So, my recommendation is to start with literally 2 minutes of mindfulness practice a day. That's all you need to start. I think oftentimes when people hear mindfulness, it's often coupled with mindful meditation, which might be something you choose to move into. When people think of meditation, they think about having, 40 minutes of silence. And then that's what they need to do in order to be mindful. And that's not it, right? So, 2 minutes of mindfulness. I usually start out people with 2 minutes of mindful breathing just because you can do your breath work, which is good. You can count your breaths, which keeps your mind a little bit more focused than just kind of silence or trying to attend to other sensations. So, what I tell people is to do consecutive rounds of counting to 10 while you're breathing. So, counting consecutively, your inhales counting on one, exhales on two, consecutively to a count of 10, and try to just focus on your breath and your counting. You're going to get distracted, especially if you've never done this before, which is supposed to happen. That's what your mind does, right? So, don't judge it. That's a really important part of mindfulness, not to judge it. So oftentimes we judge ourselves and don't even realize it, right? We live in an age and a society where their judgments are just flying, right? So, learning to just accept that your mind is going to wander. That's okay. It's to be expected. Start back at the count of one with your breathing and try to get all the way to 10. And if you get to 10, start back at one and do another round. Do like 3 rounds of that, no more than 2 minutes, and start there.
I absolutely love that. So, first of all, I hope that everyone out there is like listening to your voice because as you started going into the breathing, just your octave change, you were very relaxed. Like you had me calm down. So, I can only imagine that your son is like getting the best of this because
We do deep breathing. Yes, we
I
do
was
do
like,
deep breathing
okay,
together.
let
The
me
funny
let me
thing
start
about that is
breathing.
when I started in the psychology world, I was like, I'm not trying to do any of that positive psychology, mindfulness stuff. That's not literally would have never thought I'd be doing this, right? And I worked in a treatment center that did DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, and mindfulness is a large part of that, and absolutely fell in love with it and saw the benefit of it and have been doing it ever since. And now people have got me recorded. My clients, I've recorded mindfulness things for them that they can play on their own. So yes, there is a way to kind of guide people through that exercise that I enjoy doing.
That is cool. I mean, like I listen, and that 2 minute, I was like, yeah, I'm relaxed now. Okay, I can do some things. So absolutely see that that is helpful. So, okay, I know that you do presentations for organizations. What does that look like? Because I feel like entrepreneurs and business owners, this is something that they really need to employ for their
Yeah.
employees.
So the thing is, that's interesting. I find myself working in mindfulness into every kind of presentation I do.
Mhm.
So I give talks, everything from talks to tech companies about mental wellness and how to attend to your mental wellness in the workplace, everything from microaggressions to how companies can bring more mental wellness into their culture and their environment. And one of those things I always talk about is mindfulness, right? Giving your employees time to take small breaks in the day can be really helpful to productivity, can also be really helpful to well-being, and they can do some mindfulness. We have companies that are making like sensory calming rooms that staff can go into where they can do their mindfulness exercises or do some meditation for 15 minutes, whatever it is, having those spaces for relaxation. So I find myself working mindfulness into all things. I also do presentations around issues of interculturality and diversity.
Mm.
So in those conversations, I always have a reflective element of those kinds of workshops because it's important for people to be able to reflect. It's also important to be non-judgmental, which again is a cornerstone of mindfulness, but it's also important to be self-reflective, right? And one way that we do that is taking time to check in with ourselves. And so this idea of starting off with small mindfulness practices, so just you can center and be aware of what's in you with your thoughts and your feelings, is something I usually have in my tips and tricks kind of that I give at the end of those kinds of workshops.
That is great. That is cool. And I'm just sitting here listening and just really thinking about who all can benefit from this. And everybody comes to mind, right? Because I think, as you said, we live in this world, one that's filled with so much judgment. And oftentimes I think that people don't stop to check in with themselves because they feel like they always got to be on the go. Like you
Yeah.
always have to be doing something, or you're afraid that someone's going to be like, oh, you're being lazy. That judgment piece always comes back in. So for the person who is really struggling, like, and there are times that I struggle with this, but what I've started doing literally is in the morning, that's my time in the morning. Sometimes when I'm on the track, because I started walking, and after I do drop off in the morning,
Hmm.
I take 2 minutes, and that's what I do, kind of like center myself before I get walking, and even when I get back in the car.
Hmm.
So, are there like places that are better, or
Yeah.
is there one better way to do it, or
Well,
give
right.
people some tips?
The wonderful thing about mindfulness is you can literally do it anywhere. So I also tell people you can do mindful driving. Oftentimes when we're driving, we are like listening to music and we're into the music and we're present, but we're not like fully attending to everything that's around us, right? So you can do mindful driving where you turn off the music. It's you in the road. You're taking in the colors, the sights, what you see, what you hear, right? Part of what is wonderful about mindfulness when you're doing it on the go is that you really need to use all five of your senses, right? Another great thing you can do is while you're cooking. Um, we could do a whole show about how mindful eating can be helpful to digestion and good eating habits, right? But even prior to the eating, the cooking piece, when you're cooking, there is so much presence in front of you in terms of sensations that you could be attending to. And oftentimes when we're cooking, we're thinking about what's next on our to-do list, what we didn't do on our to-do list, the kids or whatever. So when you're cooking, you can take time, and it doesn't have to be the whole time you're cooking. Take 5 minutes, 2 minutes to just be completely present to what you're cooking. Notice the sounds of what you're cooking. Notice the textures that you have in your hand. Notice the colors of what it is you're cooking. If you're tasting things along the way, right? To just be fully present to that experience, the smells. It's a wonderful time to get in touch with all of those senses that we have.
I absolutely love that. And so it reminds me of Tabitha Brown, because that is what she talks about, right? And I think
Mhm.
that is why people have been so pulled in for her, with her cooking and watching it is because even though you're watching it in your mind, you feel like you can taste it. And she's giving you, like, as she's talking you through it, you're like, oh, I can feel the textures. And so I can absolutely see where that would be helpful. Never, ever, ever did I think about mindful eating. And I feel like I'm
Mm,
gonna have to have you come back on, and we're really gonna have to go through that,
yeah.
because you're right. Digestive issues is a thing, a big thing, and a lot of it is because most of us aren't taking the time to stop and enjoy what we're eating.
Right.
So yeah, I absolutely love that. I absolutely
Yeah.
love that.
The other
So
thing is,
go ahead.
sorry, mindful walking, which
Hmm.
whether you're walking in the big city, you walk into your car from your building, you are walking out in nature, there's always opportunity to be mindful when you're walking. So counting your steps when you're walking can also kind of help focus you. But again, you can also just be mindful of taking in and describing your senses, not judging, right? It's not like, oh gosh, that's ugly when you see something you pass on the street, right? But really describing. So I see a black poster. I see a yellow sunset. I see a gray leaf, whatever it is, right? To really take in your senses and describe as you're walking. Again, because that requires you to be fully present to your environment, which is mindfulness.
Got it. Got it. So look, we get some comments here. Diana saying she never thought about mindful cooking and she needs to practice more mindful eating. Yeah, and I just have to wonder, like with the mindful cooking, will it make me enjoy cooking more? Because I absolutely hate cooking. I do it because I don't have a choice. And quite frankly, I know if I don't, my family's either going to eat junk or they're going to go out and buy junk. So I'm trying to be more mindful in that aspect. So I have to
Mhm.
wonder if I more focus on kind of what you said, will I enjoy it more? So I may try that tomorrow. I'll let you know. Oh no, tomorrow's Friday. I'm not cooking tomorrow.
No,
I'll
not
try
not
that on,
maybe
yeah, I'll
Monday,
try
right?
that on
Maybe
Tuesday.
Monday.
No, I'm not even cooking on Monday. It's a holiday. I'm gonna try on Tuesday. And I'll let you guys know how that works out. But okay, so my next question for you is, I feel as though just as a mom and entrepreneur, and I'm not, as a woman in general, right? We wear so many hats. What can we do to get this mindfulness in the midst of all these hats that we're wearing?
I think part of it is prioritizing your wellness, right? And I think that
Mm,
that's really a difficult thing for us as women, with all of the hats we wear, whether moms or not. We wear so many different hats, like you said. We have so many different relationships we often pour into. And oftentimes it's every other thing and everybody else that becomes the priority. And I think that through COVID, I think especially we realized like you can't wait to take care of your mental health. You can't wait to take care of your well-being. And I think that mindfulness is actually a way that you can begin attending to that in ways that work with your regular routine, right? You don't have to take time outside of your routine to start practicing mindfulness. You can start practicing mindfulness in the midst of all your routines. But I also think that the more you do it, the more you start to realize and you'll start to see, like, oh, this really does impact my mood. Oh, this really does impact how I feel about my day, right? A large part of that is the non judgmental part, which I really think women need. So oftentimes we don't realize how much we judge ourselves because our judgments just become so automatic that we don't even register them as judgments. And so the more that you become in tune with yourself, the more you realize that actually that is a judgment and that's not helpful, right? And then you can work to actually change the judgments, but it takes that awareness to be aware of it. And that's all what mindfulness is about, is developing that awareness. So I think for women, I think this is a really good step towards wellness because you don't have to take 20 minutes out of your routine or an hour out of your day to start practicing it.
I love it, love it, love it, love it. Claire also loves it. She says, very well said. Prioritizing your wellness. She really loves that. And so for me, um, I've always done things because I've recognized the importance of self-care. And I know that there are certain things that if I don't do, I am not always a nice person. And I tell everybody, like, I need to take a nap. And people laugh at me. And I'm like, no, really, I need a
Serious,
nap.
right?
Like, yeah. And I tell people I become like terrible twos, like a toddler. And I'm like, so I recognize in me when I'm getting to that point where I'm like, yeah, I should just go sit somewhere and be quiet. And I tell them, and they laugh, people laugh, and we say this, and I probably say it jokingly, but I tell people, no, I'm really serious. So if you call me and I don't answer, that's why I'm not answering. Or if you want me to do something and I'm like, no, that's why. Like
Yeah.
I prioritize that nap. I really do. But what I've noticed is, just as women, and it's something that I talk about a lot, because like I said, self-care is very, very important to me. Is that we prioritize prioritize our children's appointments, their health, their eating, all of that, our husbands, and even sometimes our friends, our parents. But for whatever reason, we always put ourselves last. And
Mhm.
every year I say to people, put yourself first. I don't care in what it is. It's not selfish. If you're not whole, you can't make other people whole. And
No.
so I love that you said that. And I think a lot of people being afraid to take that moment is fear of judgment and what people are going to say. So
Hmm.
I love that you just said it doesn't have to be an hour, even though I like an hour nap.
Right.
It can be 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it is that you need to to ground yourself,
Yeah.
and make you a better person. And so yesterday I actually participated in a live where we were talking about menopause and mental health. And so,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason, that is something that we don't talk about enough. And the one thing that I was sharing with people is, as I'm in the perimenopause, menopause stage, I don't even really know what it's called at this point. I recognize that what keeps me grounded, and when I recognize those mood things are coming about, is that I take a moment for myself, and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, let me breathe
Right.
before I respond, because I might say something out of that mood. But all of it to me all ties in, and I absolutely love that. So wait, it looks like we have a question. Easton wants to know, can you please give an example to illustrate the difference between judging yourself and being self-reflective? Oh, that's a great question. All
Yeah.
right.
It actually
All right.
reminds me of this TED talk that I watched today, which was about how being introspective is not the same as being self aware.
Hmm.
In that often introspective leads us to kind of more of the self-loathing end of things than being self-aware, right? Mindfulness will help on the self-awareness part and being aware without judgment, right? But one way of judgment versus self-reflection is, I think that in order to be self-reflective, we have to be honest and accountable, right?
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that that has to include judgment. So a judging statement might be, um, I'm so lazy because I didn't finish that blank blank deadline, right? Self reflective might be, I didn't make the deadline in the time I wanted. What might have contributed to that,
Hmm. I
right? So
like
it
that.
doesn't
Yeah.
change the fact that the deadline wasn't met, right?
Right.
But how you talk to yourself and the reasons why make a difference. One of the things this TED Talk actually also talked about, which is something we talk about in therapy a lot, is we don't ask why questions in therapy often, because why questions aren't normally helpful. It's the what questions that are helpful. So when you say to yourself, like, why is this happening to me? Or why did I do that? It might be more helpful to think about what contributed to that action,
Hmm.
because the what might lead you to figuring out what you want to change or what you want to keep doing, right? So I think it's just about the way you talk to yourself. And I think we live in a society, like I said, even when it comes to positive things, oh, that's beautiful, that's, magnificent, all of those are judgment words. They're positive judgments, but they're judgments, right? And so there's
Hmm.
this there's a skill in learning how to factually observe things that don't already have an emotion embedded in it, so that you can figure out, like, what are the facts, what are my thoughts, and what are my emotions, because they're not all the same, and oftentimes you muddy them all together. So part of that emotional intelligence and part of that wellness and being self-aware is being able to distinguish what is a thought, what is a judgment, what is a feeling, what is a perception, right? And in order for us to get there, we have to start teasing those apart.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. And it all reminds me of, and I say often to people, words matter. You know, you can say a lot of things in a lot of different ways, and the inflection on your voice, all of that adds to it. So that
Mhm.
absolutely is what that reminds me of. And I see that Diane is saying that she does a lot of self-judging. And I think listening to that, I think we all do.
Mhm.
And we beat ourselves up about it. And even in our families, right? Where I think, excuse me, let me just put it out there now. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I think the older generation, just because of how they were raised and the way they were spoken to, don't often realize that the things that they say now affects people differently.
Yeah.
And I talk to a lot of young people, from some of the groups that I'm in, and I always say it is okay to tell somebody that you're offended. It's okay to tell someone that their words hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you have to keep it bottled in, because oftentimes that's not the intent.
Right.
It just comes out that way. But you should always correct people, even
Yeah.
if it's your parents,
Right.
even if it's your parents. And I,
Which might
and I
not
tell
always go over well, but but I also think
exactly.
the frame, right? Of like the frame of it. I think that we as a people, Black people especially, but not only Black people, get into this mindset of like, well, it always was done that way. I did it that way and I'm fine or you're fine. So what's the big deal, right? Or like everyone's so sensitive now. That's kind of how the older generation tends to feel. I think the reality is that we are cultivating more wellness, right? And
Mhm.
so that means that we're thinking about things in a different way. And it doesn't mean that what they did was bad, but it means that if we're prioritizing our mental wellness differently and we know that we experience things that weren't helpful to our wellness, then we should be making a change, right? Why keep doing the same thing that we know caused some difficulties for us when we don't have to?
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. So it looks like, let's see. Diane has a question. She says, can she get some resources on what's a fact and what's a thought?
So a thought can be a fact, right?
Hmm.
I think it's more about distinguishing what's a fact from what's a judgment,
Mm,
right?
okay.
And so one way to do that is by observation through facts. So if you go to when you think about mindfulness, one of the things, and so if you go to like mindfulness apps or mindfulness exercises, being able to be more aware of when you are judging, but also things like dialectical behavioral therapy focuses a lot on, which is a type of therapy that you could engage in, focuses a lot on on understanding what are facts versus what are assumptions and judgments, right? And when there are times for focusing on the facts and also acknowledging your feelings and how you can bring those together, right? In order to really be integrated people, we have to be able to consider our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions and the facts of things, right? We can't only live in a factual world and we can't only live in an emotional world, right? And when we tend to act out our emotions in unhelpful ways, it's usually because we're all focused on our emotions and we're not bringing those facts and those rationale enough, right? But when we're in a wise mind space, which is really what you want to get to with mindfulness and self awareness, where you can be aware of what the feelings are and also be aware of what the facts are and move in a direction that allows you to hold both.
Got it. So here's my question for you, right? So for the person who's kind of like, my mental health is fine. I don't need anything. What's your
Mhm.
response to that?
Just like our physical health, isn't there always something that we need, right? Like you can be a healthy person, you can have the six pack, the abs, be in shape, be in the gym, you can be eating well, and there's still more you have to do to maintain that, right? One of the things that I always think is so interesting about the way we think about mental health is that no one bats an eye when we have to do our visits with our primary care physicians once a year for a physical, right?
Mhm.
No one bats an eye when they have to call the pediatrician for their child when there's something going on, even if it's something minor like a cold, right? But we tend to have this idea that you only go to therapy and you only work on your mental wellness if there's something seriously wrong with you. If you have a mental illness or if you're not functioning well, then that's when you go and you get mental wellness or mental health support. And it's just a stigma that we have in our society, many societies, right? That has been wholly unhelpful to us in terms of overall wellness. Our mind is one of our largest organs and one of the most complex. So the idea that we wouldn't attend to that and do maintenance of our mind and the same way we do our body, it's kind of outlandish when you think about it, right? And so even if you're doing well in your mental health, think about ways that you're maintaining it. And maybe mindfulness isn't for you, but there has to be some ways that you're maintaining that, whether that's through your spiritual practices or through other kinds of physical outlets that you feel like help you emotionally. There has to be some maintenance of your mental wellness. And I think we really need to be diligent about thinking about what that is for us.
Love that. Mental maintenance. I absolutely love that. I'm about to start using that because you're right, right? Like, even though we feel like we're okay, I always tell people there's nothing like talking to somebody that really isn't connected to you and is just going to listen. Like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, you can't get that. Like,
Right.
go and get that. And then I always tell people, oftentimes it just feels great to unload it. Like
Yeah.
you've been carrying around these burdens and sometimes you just need to unload it and talk it through with someone.
Mhm.
And so, and I always say, don't look at it as a crutch, like,
Right.
oh my God, this is bad. I'm doing this for, people are going to think I'm crazy. And I think that's the part we got to get away from, the whole
Yeah.
craziness. You only need mental health, work if you're crazy. And I
No.
said, well, then maybe we're all crazy, because I absolutely think we need
Right.
it. But yes, I
Yeah.
absolutely love that.
I
So
also think that
go ahead.
people tend to not realize how much their mental wellness impacts their relationships, right? So if you think that your mental wellness is great, ask people that you're in relationship with to give you some
That's a
feedback,
good
right? And see if I'm serious, and see if they agree, right? Because part of what fosters true intimacy is having self-awareness and being mentally well. And so part of the way you check in with yourself, I think, also is checking on the quality of your relationships.
one. You trying to break some people up, Crystal. I don't know about that, Dr.
No, I'm not
TD.
trying to break nobody up. It's all
I
about
don't
development.
know about people might not be ready for that step. Although I think it's important, they might not be ready for that step. And really they probably should get ready, right? Because
Yeah.
oftentimes what happens is when you start checking in with yourself, right? Then that's when you start to see other things in other people.
Mhm.
And it is important that you check in. So yeah, even though that might cause some rift, I think
That's
that's
only for the
that's
people
a
who
great
feel they're
idea.
good. Right. That's only for the people who feel they're 100% good. That's if you feel like you're 100% good, then start asking some other people in your life.
Got it. And so my next question is, what about children? How can we instill this mindfulness practice in our children?
Yeah. So I think it's important to start with kind of the 2 minutes of check in, even with your kids. And of course, it will look different, right? But asking your kids when they get home from school and engage with them, 2 minutes of checking in. Like, how did you feel today? What kinds of thoughts did you have today? What were some of the positive thoughts that you had about yourself today? Were there any thoughts that you had that maybe weren't as positive, where you felt yourself judging yourself? So teaching your kids what it means to judge themselves and not. My son is 3, and we're in that stage where he's very verbal. So he'll say things like, oh, I don't feel good about myself, like when he gets in trouble. And so we'll talk like, well, what is it that you don't feel good about? I'll ask him to tell me, and then we'll change it. So can you say something positive about yourself? What are some of your positive qualities, right? So he knows the term positive talk, right? I think also mindfulness of helping them understand their feelings, right? So part of self-awareness is being able to also name feelings. And so I think with kids, a big part of mindfulness can be helping them name their feelings when they have them. And some of us as adults don't do a great job naming our feelings. So if you can have feeling charts around the house, or you like feeling cards that have like a face that expresses a feeling along with the feeling word, to help your kids understand what emotions they're feeling and what the words are to express them, so they can begin to tap into that.
I love that. And so, kind of what I've started doing, my kids are older, is I've always done the check in with them, outside of school, and I've asked the open ended questions. So it wasn't just a yes and no answer. But more
Mm-hmm.
so, I started engaging them in conversation and really telling them about how I've been feeling and what I've been doing and things,
Mm-hmm.
things that are affecting me. And I see that as I have that conversation with them, in turn, it kind of has opened them up more to have
Right.
conversations more with me. And it's funny because a lot of my kids' friends are like, "Why do kids talk to you?" And I'm like, "Well, it's I talk to them back. Like, right. I respect their opinion, and I ask them what's going on and how they feel. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
always talking at them.
At
I'm
them.
talking to them, and I'm listening. And
Right.
so I like that. I like that piece, and I absolutely think the earlier we start, the better. And then I think sometimes, right now, even, not feeling judgy on myself as I'm thinking about this, is, I've reflected on just some things that I did as a parent, and kind of was like, well, was it enough? Should I have done
Mm.
that? And then it goes back to that whole gentle parenting. And I'm kind of like, well, what is that? Like, it's a buzzword. No one really knows
It's
what it
a buzzword.
means. They're
It
like,
is
oh,
a
don't
buzzword.
spank your kids. Everyone is throwing out all these terms. And so it just causes you, like I said, to be a little judgy of yourself. And then you think back, like, well, if I wouldn't have done that, maybe my kid wouldn't have done that. So I've been
Mm.
having conversations, especially with my son. He's in college, and he's making mistakes, right? And he's feeling like bad about making these mistakes. So I have to like reflect and say, listen, these are all the things that I did.
Yeah.
Your life is about making mistakes. And the
Yeah.
earlier you make them and the earlier you fail, the
Yeah.
better off you'll be later on. And
Yeah.
so All of that to me
Yeah.
just ties in with the early check-in with mindfulness.
It
Yes.
does, but it also ties into how we talk about things ourselves, right? If we are judging ourselves, then inevitably we're going to pass on some judgment
Yes.
to our kids, right?
Yes.
So the more that we can be aware of how we talk about things instead of saying why when our kids do something, hey, what's going on with you? Let's talk. The same way that we need to be saying to ourselves, hey, what's going on? Let me check in with myself, as opposed to why would you do that? Which is how we typically talk to ourselves, right? Right. And so I think it all trickles down. I think once we learn to be more gentle with ourselves, which again doesn't mean not being accountable, but more gentle in how we talk to ourselves and more curious about ourselves, then we can be more curious about our kids. And then they learn how to be curious about themselves.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So Tiffany is saying that she's been doing that type of thing with her teenager every day. Yeah, it makes a difference. And I just think,
Mhm.
especially if you're here in the Philadelphia area where the crime rate is like out of control, sometimes I just feel like I need to check in with them because of how I'm feeling, the anxious, of them going out and being somewhere and something happens. So I just feel like I need to check in with them so that
Mhm.
I'm not putting my anxiety on them. I don't
Right.
want them to not go out and explore and enjoy the world. But sometimes I'm like, no, stay home. Let's stay in this bubble. We don't need to go out. Yeah, yeah, it's
And I think
crazy.
modeling appropriately how to
Mhm.
talk about emotions is, like you said, is so important as well. And it also speaks to breaking down the stigma that we have in our society around mental health. When you can talk to your kids about feeling anxious, having days where you feel down or a low mood, and that that's okay. And it doesn't mean that you're crazy. It doesn't mean that something's wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you need to go into an inpatient facility, even though there might be times that it gets there, right? But
Absolutely.
being able to talk about it as an everyday occurrence, because we do have everyday emotions. We have changes in our emotional state, and we're not always up here with
Mhm.
everything being wonderful and great. And we should be able to find appropriate ways to share those experiences with our children.
I agree 100%. And I also add a staycation into mine. I check into a
Mm,
hotel like once a quarter. Yeah. That is one of the best things I could do for myself ever. Like ever, ever, ever. It's
yeah.
it's it's an amazing, like
I
it's a
talk to
reset for
business
me.
professionals. Exactly. I talk to business professionals about how important it is to model for your employees that you know how to disconnect from work
Mhm.
and take your leave.
Yes.
If your employees never see you take your own vacations, and I mean real vacations, like 5 day vacations, right? Not just talking long weekends, then your employees aren't going to feel like they have the space to do that, and they aren't going to see the importance of that. And it's the same way with our kids. If our kids don't see us taking mental health days, right? And having days where we clock out from social media and don't do anything with work and are just with ourselves, then we're not giving them that same kind of permission to do that. So I love that.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. Okay. So we are almost at 45 minutes. And so give me 5 tips that people need to know that mindfulness matters.
5 tips. Okay, so we're going to start with 5 tips that you guys can take away from mindfulness. One is that it all starts with 2 minutes. That you can begin your mindfulness journey with just 2 minutes of mindful breathing or mindful attentiveness to whatever task you're doing. The next thing I want to say is that your breath is so important to your overall wellness. So that's another
Mhm.
tip right there, is that if you can include some mindful breathing, I call it belly breathing, which is if you sing, it's breathing from your diaphragm, right? So when you do your inhales, you want to make your belly inflate just a little bit, like a little balloon on your inhales. That gives you a deeper breath to then follow through with your exhale. That'll get that blood flowing a little differently as well. So that's the next tip. Then I would say that you want to begin to notice your judgments,
Mhm.
right? So and just in your day to day, notice when you're judging yourself and work on doing a quick reframe. It doesn't have to be this idealistic, affirmation of yourself. It can just be a quick reframe. Instead of, why are you acting like this? You can say, what's going on with you today, Crystal?
Mhm.
Right? Check in with yourself, be curious with yourself. The next thing I would say is that any attention you can bring to being aware of your emotions. We live in a world where we hear a lot about feelings and emotions, but oftentimes we have a hard time naming them. There are a lot of emotions, and oftentimes we stick to mad, sad, angry, tired, hungry, right? And there's a lot more. And so the more fluent we can become in emotions, the more able we are to express ourselves and understand what's going on with ourselves. So, building up our emotional vocabulary and our emotional awareness. And lastly, I would say every little bit counts. So,
Mm.
again, we're talking about noticing your judgments, but it's also important where you're coming into this practice, any practice really, to know that it starts with one step and to not expect perfection from yourself, and to know that every little bit, 2 minutes a day, one day a week, if that's where you start, is a step in the right direction.
Oh, I love that. Those tips are great. I love that. It looks like we have another question. So it says, she says, Easton says, along the lines of a yearly physical with a pediatrician, would you recommend to have a child have a check-in with a professional?
That's such a good question. I feel like I would say yes in particular season. So I think one, it depends on how you've set up your household to be comfortable with mental health as a doctor's appointment, right? If you're in a household where you go to therapy and where other people in your household will go to therapy, I think it's a great idea to check in with your child and see if they'd want to talk to someone, just to have an objective party. But I think this can be particularly important for high stress transitions, right? So the
Mhm.
transition from elementary school to middle school, or middle school to high school, or if you have a student athlete who is getting into more, varsity level or more competitive sports, that can be a good time to check in. Um, Going from high school to college. So I think you want to think about the transitions and whether or not those might be good times to employ someone as a proactive implementation as opposed to reactive.
I love that. I think that is an amazing question. And it's actually something that I talk a lot about with my friends. Most of us have older children, and I tell them, what I'm seeing, especially in the younger college students, is the stress levels are through the roof. And I'm
Mhm.
like, they don't know how to manage it. And a lot of it is because when they were home, we were managing everything for them. So now they're at school and they're expected to know how to do everything. And
Right.
so I absolutely think if your child is amenable to it, because I think it's what, if they're 15 or over, you can't even, like, they have to fill out the forms themselves. But I would absolutely introduce it. And so how I'm kind of introducing it to my family is I'm kind of like, I'm going to start talking to somebody just because I think it's helpful. You guys
Hmm.
want to talk to somebody? And, my daughter's kind of been like, I don't know. She giving me the
Right.
side eye, but I'm wearing her
Right.
down. I'm wearing her down.
Right.
But I absolutely think it's important because like I said, I'm seeing the stress level from these kids, and I'm like, it's not that deep. And then I
Yeah.
have to think back, like, what did we as parents do to make these kids think that level has to keep going? See, look at me judging myself. You see that, right? So
Gentle.
yeah, so absolutely, gentle parenting. Yes, gentle parenting. So for the people out there who are watching the replay, how can people get in contact with you? Are you accepting new patients? And I know that you said your website is about to load. Let us know what the
Yeah.
website address is and what you're going to
Yeah.
be doing on that website.
Yeah, so you can find me on IG now, your favorite psych doc. I do have a public page, so you can follow me there. And Tamika follows me as well, so you can find me on there. If you can't, it's your, as in you are, Fave, F-A-V, psych doc. My website is drcrystaltd.com. You can go there now. It's under construction. You can send me a message if you are interested in learning more about my services. The full website will be up probably by the end of the month, and it will focus on both individual and family therapy, as well as the consultation and speaking engagements that I do for both businesses, religious organizations, and entrepreneurs around wellness, which includes mindfulness.
Absolutely love it. And so if you have anything coming up that people can participate in, by all means, share the information with me. I will make sure that I will put it out there. Look, you got everyone giving you hearts and shout outs and saying how proud
Oh,
they are of
thank you
you.
all.
Yes, I've already said, I've been following you and I've been watching what you're doing, and I think it's absolutely amazing. I'm looking forward to what this next season of life is going to bring you. I know the sky's the limit. And we're going to be talking because I feel like you need to come back on because we definitely need to get this mindful eating down because I
Yes.
feel like that's going to be extremely helpful. So, guys, everyone out there, please make sure you're following her on Instagram. Check out her website. If you need any of the links or anything of that nature, by all means, reach out to me. And if you have questions and you need to connect with her, let me know. I will make it happen. But Dr. TD, thank you. It's been amazing to see you. I love you much. And I'll talk to you
Thank
later.
you. Thank you so
Bye,
much.
everybody.
Bye bye.